Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the second in a series of EOS Cortex webinars titled Version 1.10 Overview. I'm your host, Madeline King, EOS Group's Marketing Manager, and presenting today is Tony Colburn, one of our senior consultants. The goal for today is to provide a 30-minute presentation with time after for questions and answers. Your microphones have been placed on mute, so please use the question and answer icon to type your questions during the webinar, and we will answer them after the presentation. The webinar will be recorded for your use, and I will send an email to the link with a link to the recording and contact information. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tony.
Thanks, Madeline, and welcome today. I guess first of all, I'd like to apologize in advance if we hear any delivery trucks, dogs barking, or landscaping blowers or something like that. I am at home broadcasting to you here, so again, welcome. As mentioned, I'm a senior consultant here with EOS Group, and I sit on the Cortex project development team and also lead client implementations. Today we're going to do, as Madeline mentioned, the second in a series of Cortex webinars where, for the most part, we follow tracks here by benchmarking, conceptual estimating, and so forth. Today's is slightly different in that we have a new release, and so the goal would be to introduce high-level overview of Cortex for those who aren't familiar with it, but also dive into some of the new features of version 1.10. Little history on our organization, 25 years in the business. We focused specifically on pre-construction, cost estimating systems, benchmarking, and conceptual estimating services. So our focus is with the AEC and owner market. Many of our clients are in the ENR top 400, and over the last 20 years, we've had over 2,000 successful implementations and several partnerships as well with industry-leading solution providers. So EOS Cortex, as many of you are familiar, is our project history system and provides benchmarking, conceptual estimating, and trend analysis use cases. We will be covering primarily today the product in the lens of a benchmarking system. However, these other use cases are also well supported. One of the things I like to do in the webinar, just based on questions we've had in the past, is to identify some of the things that project history isn't. There are a lot of solutions and organizations out there providing various services, but it is not a BI tool. We do provide data for business intelligence integrations. So if that's something that's of interest to you, we can certainly support that workflow. Project history is a database of your data. So it's not anonymized industry data that you can tap into. You're essentially publishing your projects, whether those be cost estimates or cost actuals, into the system. It's not a detailed estimating system by any means, though we can store detailed level information. It's not a content database, such as a commodity database of pricing and labor rates and so forth. Again, we can store that information as it's consumed by your source information, but in its own right, it's not a content database. We here at EOS Group are not economists. We don't provide market index information. That's readily available from governmental and private sources. However, we do store and make use of them through our factoring subsystem for normalization and escalation. So the basic use cases I covered before are related to one another. supported primarily with this history database. So one of the things that we found out there in the industry is that benchmarking can really help define your best practices, identify performance or cost deficits, and identify alternate solutions for you as you evaluate various needs for your clients and yourselves. It's also, I think, a good platform to help initiate or support continuous improvement processes. And that's what we're going to touch on a little bit today with some of the new features. At the end of the day, it allows you to develop data to support methods and tool development across your group or your organization. So let's look at some of the feature highlights of version 110. There are some fixes and various alerts I'll get to at the end of the webinar, but these are sort of the big ones that I'll cover today. We've incorporated linear trend lines into scatter charts. We're allowing now editing of project fields in the browser. Prior to this, you needed to download the project back into Excel's import template and make the changes and then republish. So this has a great new capability of making those changes right inside the browser. After that, we've got some new field types that we're supporting in the KPI or key performance indicator views. Additional types of fields that you can use at the cost element level, as well as some user interface and administrative utility improvements. And I'll touch on some of those. Probably from a business perspective, the linear trend lines and scatter charts is the big splash item, I think. It really supports analysis in our effort to improve Cortex project history with every release to give tangible and useful tools. We certainly look forward to hearing from you out there in the user community or elsewhere in the market to support our decisions and provide feedback. So this is a start into that area, and we're going to use some basic statistics and charting to help improve your systems. Linear regression, certainly nothing new, common, very common actually in capital project industry, industrial, and a basis for parametric models. Essentially using two independent variables, one independent, and that they have a strong correlation with those dependent variables, driving cost estimating relationships. So the scatter chart itself can support not just understanding of your data, but actually using it. Typically, those are measured by a correlation coefficient, an R-squared value, where that value closer to 1 means it represents better closeness of data or relevance of data. And this same linear regression can actually be used for prediction. So estimating using the linear equation that's also a result of that correlation coefficient. So let's jump into Cortex and take a look at this feature. So here on the homepage, as you can see, it's a personalized homepage to you. So it's going to provide me with information on projects I've recently viewed, those that have been recently published. And then down here is going to be fairly dynamic based on areas I've been in the system previously, whether that's looking at saved collections of projects or perhaps projects that are similar to those I've been viewing. Getting to projects I want to work with can be accessed through our classification subsystem, where the projects are organized by type or subtype. You can create a hierarchy here to help catalog your projects. For example, here I have one by data source, where I can see that my projects are organized at the top level by whether they're a cost actual, cost estimate, or perhaps some value engineering studies that we're performing. So very easy to get in there and look at data that way. There's also a keyword search, and I can look across projects or cost elements that allow me to mine data just by keyword searches. So if I'm looking for offices, I can type that in and get a result list of offices. We call these collections. There's quite a bit of analysis you can do within the collection, from just sorting data using the headers to filtering by either cost or non-cost data, such as quantities or even construction characteristics of your projects. Once you've defined your list down to a usable set, the charts can be accessed from here as well. So here I have a scatter chart that allows me to really do the first step in understanding and using your data, and that's really understanding your historical trends. So first I'm going to publish this project information. If I've done a good job and consistently recorded things like cost and non-cost attributes, I can start to get some understanding using these bivariate studies. So here I'm looking at an independent variable that hopefully will tell me something in terms of my dependent variable, typically cost. And is there a relationship? Is there a pattern that I can see? Are those points close or far apart? Well, previously, all we were able to do is provide you with this picture. And now we've introduced some capabilities to allow you to see the correlation coefficient through a trend line. And just by clicking on the word trend line here, it will display the trend line and provide you with that R-squared value as well as the linear equation associated with that. In addition to that, we'll provide you with the first and second standard deviation, meaning what is the spread of those projects or across that mean? And that tells me something too. Means, are these projects on the outside of the standard deviation relevant? Do I want those included in any of my cost studies? And if I don't, I can actually remove outliers and Cortex will recast the data. So by removing that, we can see changes in the correlation coefficient and whether this information is relevant or useful to me or not. So it doesn't look like project duration can predictably offer information that may be useful. So using different variables, I can come down and perhaps see if something like the project size offers better information. So by simply changing the variables, we recast the data and provides me with some information that I can predictably use. So as we get that correlation coefficient closer to 1, we can expect more relevance of the data and make this system useful, not just for benchmarking purposes, but also for doing predictive analysis. The collection itself can be quite useful. Sometimes we identify through benchmarking projects to allow us to evaluate that project against the comparator set. So in the case where I would like to take this project, maybe it's a new project that I've published to the system, I can baseline that. And by baselining it, I can also see information here statistically with or without charts to provide information on how that compares to the set. So here I have a baseline to average statistic that tells me in terms of project size, this Bannon Creek Pro Center is 84% of the average of the comparators below. The unit price is 61% of that. project grand total amount, half of that. Now, understandably, things like project quality, execution, risk, things like that, normalization would have to take place. But Cortex will offer you these statistical values as well as identify that project on any charts. So whether I'm here on the scatter chart, I can see where it falls within the range of the others. High-low charts are available to see where it falls within the range of any one of your attributes in the system. And we will place those baseline projects here at the beginning of any bar charts or pie charts that you want to display. So by using linear regression, we've taken Cortex a step further to support your internal processes. Okay, so let's go back quickly to our slide deck here, and let's take a look at some of the other 110 feature highlights. Editing project fields in the browser, new field types in KPI views, text fields in cost elements, and then we'll take a look at some of the UI improvements. Going back to the home page here, I'll select a project. So in single project view, we can see all the attributes associated with the project. And now if I need to change any of these attribute values, rather than export the project out to Excel, make the changes and re-import them, I have a new icon that will allow me to come in and make changes to any values that require input. So if the conditions of performance in this case are actually difficult, I can go ahead and save and make that change very quickly and move on with my day. So that is something that looks like it's pretty straightforward. We're very happy with this new capability. It will really speed the data conditioning process for our clients, and pretty darn easy to use too. In KPI views, we've introduced the ability to show different kinds of data. Prior to version 1.10, we could only show currency, quantity, and or numerical data in these key performance indicator views. With 110 now, we can introduce attributes from the project as actual textual information. So here I've created a column in the KPI view, and under the various systems, I've been able to identify for the consumers of the information, that information. So here we can see that the interior finishes grade is low, the frame type is concrete, and the foundation is deep, providing the user with more information about some of these metrics. In the cost element views, we can now add columns that are not just quantity and or currency based information. So if I'm looking at this, we have our typical breakdown of cost. These are your usual suspects of quantities, cost, percentages of total, and so forth. And now I can add things like attribute information to give me a little bit more data about the quality of the project. So here I can see that the project complexity is moderate, allowing you to provide more information at the cost element view. Okay. So at this point, we will probably want to provide you with some information of the administrative module. In administration, we've introduced some helpful tools to allow you to understand a little bit more of your data. One of those is the ability now to see what fields in your project field group are actually system fields. Because they can be renamed, we had trouble figuring out which fields were actually system fields and which ones were fields that we had created. Of course, all system fields are required. So now we can simply filter the list and very quickly see which fields are system fields. Very helpful as you condition your data and set up publishing templates for your users. On top of that, publishing templates now will automatically be updated with required fields. So the administrator has the ability here to make any fields in the system required. So one issue is that if you make a field required, you would have to update your project import templates that you've customized to make sure all required fields are in them. If the administrator makes a field required, at this point, we will include those required fields in all publishing templates. So there isn't a risk of users not entering required information and getting errors on import. So just some nice to haves that we think have been much needed and have been asked for by the community. All right, so let's take a look here at a couple alerts. One thing, if your system has been upgraded, a data refresh will be required. Essentially, it's an administrative function that republishes the information. So that may be something you'll see after you log in. Also, I wanted to communicate that with version 1.11, which is the next release, by the way, we're expecting that in early August, we will stop supporting Microsoft's Internet Explorer. We will continue to support Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, even though some of the other popular browsers are not supported. We've had quite a bit of success with Safari as well. So we wanted to pass that along. Going forward and what to look for from Cortex, project history is now the currently shipping module. We are under development for release late in 2020, early 21. With our budget builder module, we'll take those concepts of cost estimating relationships and more regression trending to support cost modeling and parametrics, both at the project level as well as the cost element level. And then out on the horizon is our advisor module, which will leverage predictive analytics. And as many of you know, we already have a similar projects algorithm that allows some degree of configuration so you can determine for yourselves which projects are considered similar across the organization. Also, I would like to announce, and this is a unofficial announcement, but we have been working on for a while a new module called Cortex 365. Cortex 365 is a project history solution, ideal for small to mid-sized organizations or larger firms. That will be released with version 1.11 in early August, and we will have a public announcement closer to that date. All right, well, with that, I would like to open that up for any questions. I believe that Madeline has been following those along, and she will read those aloud as they come up. So Madeline, I'll turn it over to you for any questions.
Yeah, we had one, can attributes be added to the item grid like the elements?
At this time, no, but what I would say is that item fields can be anything. So they can be cost, quantity, textual, or actual element library information. So you can add textual information or tag information to the item record, yes.
Great, thank you. The next one is it possible to edit cost items in the browser?
So just to maybe tell a story with a picture here. There are three major views on the Elements tab of a project. And the first one here is the cost element. And cost elements are effectively roll-ups of your detail. So each of the numbers inside of the parentheses here represent how many detailed line items are under, in this case, services. If I double click this row or I come over to this icon, a pane will appear below showing all of the detailed line items. So the question is, can I edit elements and or line items in the browser like I can with the new edit projects view? At this time, you will still have to send the information out to Excel to make changes to the cost element information. The reason being is because the relationships between the items in the summary level are often calculated throughout the system. We will still need to pull that raw data down, make the changes, and re-import the data to honor potentially a lot of calculations in the summary levels or in the extended values that we have on the various grids.
Great, thank you. The next one is, how is AI/machine learning planned to be used in Advisor?
Okay, great question. I'll start by just taking a quick look at our current capabilities and then build off of that. So right now in Cortex, you have the ability to identify similarity rules. Out of the box, we give you some pretty basic ones, like, for example, if the project type matches, then it's similar. So if we come in here and we look at all of our classified projects, any of these three hospitality projects will be considered similar to one another. However, you can create as many fields and types as you want. So on numerical, currency-based, we will say, what's the match type? Well, on project size, because it's numerical, we will consider them similar if they're within a range of 75% of the project you're looking at, and also give you the ability to weight that similarity and on down the line. So you would probably weight certain other types of attributes differently. And this is an example of, the administrator or you defining what you think is similar. And we'll continue to support that. However, as we build into Advisor, we are going to use your data to be supported with algorithms and suggest to you perhaps why information is different or why it's similar. A good example of that may be, again, I'll go back to my my project search, or maybe I'll look at cost elements, because we can do that there as well. I have saved some studies of cost elements that I may use for benchmarking or conceptual estimating. Here I have one horizontal pumps. Here are all these horizontal pumps. I've already looked them up. I've named and saved them. And now I can do some analysis. So based on the power rating and horsepower, can I feasibly predict equipment hours? And any of these hover notes tell me something about the data. Well, if Cortex Advisor was in place, I might recommend to you certain data types of other relevant information. So right now we're just looking at what I've identified as the variables, which is power rating and equipment hours. However, there may be other statistically significant relationships that Cortex could recommend to you that you didn't realize. And certainly as you get thousands of cost elements in the system and hundreds of projects, it might be very hard for any one person to have familiarity with all of that information. And so by mining this information and providing suggestions to you, you could potentially have a better chance of success with your cost study. So really what it's going to be doing is predictably giving you information based on parameters that you set in the database to help you make better decisions. So if the system notices that not only equipment hours are significant, maybe also the hourly rate is. And you should take a look at that as well.
Great. The next one is, can I export charts with data to Excel so I can work more with the data and charts?
Okay, so we do support right now copying the image. So if you want to use this chart image in a presentation, we'll give you a graphic of that. As far as taking the exact same data you're looking at is, let's say as an Excel export, and only the data you're looking at, we are not supporting that. That's a great suggestion. However, do know that you can always export we can always export complete flat data of all the projects you're looking at. And that's what our current business intelligence integration solution is it will send all project information to a workbook that you can leverage that from. So in essence, I guess the long story is that yes, we can do that. The short story is I can't do it with the same data that you're looking at in the chart visually. So for example, here, when I export these projects and I choose flat data, I can decide what cost structure I want. I'll get both the cost structure, meaning all the cost elements for these projects, as well as all the attributes for those projects. So from that, you could certainly make any kind of chart you wanted. It's the same base data that's available for you in the scatter chart views.
Great. The next one is, how do you handle programs where there may be multiple areas, facilities, or structures?
Okay. Well, Cortex is highly configurable, so we don't come to you and say, here's our canned solution, accept all of the attributes as they are and so forth. So you can configure the system as it fits your business needs. This is a common issue for us. You can go about it a couple different ways. Let's see here. One of those would be to, here I've got a development project. Within that project, there is a podium, a tower, a recreation deck, a garage, and obviously the site work. So in essence, we can publish each one of those sub-projects as separate Cortex records. Now, providing statistical information like average and so forth probably doesn't make as much sense. Therefore, if you wanted to see the, let's say the total cost or the total quantity reflective of those projects. We give you a total statistical row. We give you total statistical columns. So here we can see that the overall project size is adding all of the square footages, same with amounts, and the unit price is reflecting all of those together. Alternatively, or in conjunction with that, you can publish all of these together as a single project, in which case the podium, the tower, rec deck, and so on would be published as a single program. So you can go about it that way as well. So if I look for all projects of the certain name or type, you can see here I've got the entire project, and that project would represent all of those different sub-projects. You might create an attribute called sub-projects included, in which case it could be a checklist of components that are there. We have clients who've actually introduced the components as part of the cost structure. So rather than from here going right into direct costs and then the unit format in this case, we could actually nest in here the tower, then unit format, the parking deck, then unit format, and so on. So you've got some options there. It kind of depends on your business requirements. Typically what I'll do is ask the question, do you need to compare major development projects with other major development projects? And if you do, it might be good to introduce those sub-projects as cost elements. If you don't need to do that, then a cost study such as I showed you first, where you just have the sub-projects developed separately and the ability to total that information up, that might be sufficient for you.
Great. The next one is, fundamentally, what is the difference between comparison of projects in a collection versus comparing them side by side?
Okay, so that's an excellent question. In training, we often are focusing on major workflows, and the first workflow is always to get to this collection. You know, whether you're searching by a name or by a type, and that collection has quite a bit of comparative capability in its own right. So aren't I comparing? If I put all of these together in rows, I may want to look at them in pictures. I may want to see where they are on a map. But I'm doing comparisons. I might be in the charts doing comparisons. I can add, as you see, statistic rows to give me average, high, low. So in effect, a lot of comparative capability is available right here within the collection. Whether those collections have to do with projects or cost elements, quite a bit's available to you here. The comparison feature takes that a bit further, so I can take projects that are of interest to me and use the comparison feature, and it's going to take all of this project data. And so the first difference is that those projects are now columns and they're not rows. I have tabs on the left that allow me to look at the different kinds of information. Here I'm looking at attribute information across those projects. I can look at quantity information. I can go look at those key performance indicators, and so on and so forth. So as columns, I might get the different kind of information I want. And in the cost element view, that's no different. This is probably where I think the two comparative capabilities really stand out. Not only in the comparison view can I get statistical data. Maybe again, I'm interested in the average quantity and the average unit cost of those projects. And I can see that all the way down through the cost element tree. So comparing cost elements is not something you can do in the collection. In addition to that, we can increase data density by selecting more compare columns. So right now I'm just looking at the quantity and the unit price, but perhaps I'm interested also in the labor amount, or of that unit price, how much is a markups, percent of grand total. And so each project will get 3 of the compare columns. The last thing that really stands out is that these projects were all built or had a midpoint of construction in different points in time and location. So here we got 2002 in Nashville, 2000 DC, and so on. Cortex's ability to factor this information is available in the comparison view. So here I can take all of these projects and localize them to Phoenix in 2021, and it will adjust or factor this information to today's date and escalate it a year forward based on any economic information I want to configure in the system. So one step at a time, we are introducing more and more capability into Cortex all the time. About 2 releases a year is our target. And we do have a backlog item to support normalization in more areas of the system. But right now, if you wanted to normalize the information, you would take it out here into a comparison. And we'll always present to you that overall factor, and with a yellow bar across the top, let you know that it has been factored.
Great, thank you. The next question is, most of your project type seem to be buildings. Do you have examples of oil and gas, like pipeline project data?
Specifically, I don't. This is our sample data. We do have quite a few building examples. I do have some plant examples, however. I'm going to go here to market sector, plants and facilities. So I have some power generation projects. I have some transmission distribution. If I go into power generation here, we have some plants that operate more at a, let's say, a capacity factor scenario. So let's say I'm just interested in projects that are boiler, and now I can use that same kind of information where the project size, where the cost driver is kilowatts in this case, it's a power plant, and project total amount can be used for any of those kinds of cost estimating relationships.
Great. The next one is, how detailed can the cost data be? Does Cortex represent just a summary roll-up of quantities and costs?
So yes, I was showing you before, most of the comparative capabilities are across that summary roll-up, or cost elements as we call them. However, we do store as much detail as your source systems, whether those be Excel, estimating systems, project execution, and so forth, can support. So that's always on the Elements tab. And here are my roll-ups, usually industrial work's done more along the lines of disciplines. So here I have engineering, civil work, equipment, and so forth. And it's the item detail below that you can configure with as much information as you like. So I'm just showing a few columns. Again, I can drill even further. So double clicking down, we're looking at this 2,000-ton pump. And as you can see, it's got a lot of categorization type information, as well as cost information, production rates, spec information, unit prices, and any kind of breakdown structure that you would also like to support. So we can carry quite a bit of data and support your needs that way. Additionally, links are available. So many of the configurations I've worked on point users to either a document share through a URL. And that way, if, for example, you want to publish a higher level of detail to Cortex, you could do that. And if people wanted to drill down deeper, they could either reference a project that's attached or go out to a system share and look at the projects there. So that ban in office that I have has quite a bit of that as an example. So here I have not only pictures that drive my thumbnails, but I can go out to a document control system and see supporting documents if I want to store those there as too.
Great, thank you. Next question, the contingency factor that was shown, can that be chosen for each project separately, or is it, say, 10% across the board?
So I think that was available in the factoring. Yeah, so this is something that you can factor. The subsystem is really quite configurable, meaning you can represent anything you want. The most, usual suspects are location and date, but we do support currency and unit system conversions. After that, I've seen all kinds of creativity, but you can adjust production factors. You can adjust the project based on complexity or contingency. So I might also want to apply a contingency factor to the project. And these are maintained in rate tables. So you could set up the increments of rates that you want, but it would allow you to adjust that. This project, I think I set up this contingency for the plant projects, so the building projects don't have it, but literally anything you want to configure, you can put together and factor projects with that information.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions at this time.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for joining today. We'll give you your 10 minutes back or so. Please reach out to us either through our website or Madeline can provide you with information as well. And if you have any interest in looking at Cortex further, let us know. We'll provide a demonstration, access to our demonstration site if you want to play around as well. But again, thank you for your attention today, and hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, Tony. And I will send a follow-up email with this recording and also a link to the recording before where Tony shows how to benchmark a project. So thank you, everyone.